Sounds like we are saying that architects are important. They do already exist. And that if you really want to make them function, context and communication seems to be the key.
Anybody, doesn't matter what level you are,
Right.
The more you can derive context in solving problems and delivering value, the better you will be received and the more successful everyone will be.
My experience is that most architects are also human, and so they're also engineers. So they have their opinions on what the right thing to do is, and that's what they want to do. And it doesn't matter whether it actually will work for the solution or not. They think that that's the right way to do it.
I would argue that architect's job is to keep track of the grand design.
Welcome to episode whatever of the Performant Professional. Hi, I'm Michael Forrester.
I'm Chris McNabb.
I'm Louis Puster.
And let's see, today's episode is going to center around something that has come up many times, I think, across all of our careers to a certain degree, which is basically like, why do I need architects? What do they even do? And I want to frame this up a little bit before I release it to the floor, is that we're talking about enterprise architects, solutions architects, and basically systems and software architects. Like those are the main kinds of architects that we're talking about. So we're going to talk about it at both a tactical and a strategic level and all of the gradations in between. So here's the first kind of question.
Can we first talk about what we mean by architect here? Because I feel like what we're trying to get at is the architect that makes all the decisions, has this great plan, and does none of the work to actually implement it.
Okay.
Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Or are we? Okay.
Yes. I think we're talking about the guy or girl or in between. Let's not be.
Yeah.
Let's
The
not
person.
The person.
Be. Yeah. Let's not be. What
We
they
think.
call binariest? I don't even know at this point. Anyway, let's not be those people. I think the thing that we're talking about is the person who is responsible for facilitating the business to technical translation. And
Right.
Technical translation being maybe possibly the strategic technical conversation, which could include a roadmap, which could include strategic decisions like principles that we're following, not necessarily tools. I think when you start to get into specific tools, I think there can be some influence at the strategic level, but I think as you go down the chain, down solutions architects to systems and software architects, you're getting into stronger tool decisions that may be derivative, but the main goal of an architect is, I think, to translate business requirements into technical requirements, but they're not necessarily the builders. But that's something we can talk about, because I think a good architect actually has built the thing in question, even if it's a proof of concept. Let's hear it.
I mean, yes. Yeah, I think that an architect generally is not, they don't translate business requirements into technical requirements. I think that they translate business requirements into technical capabilities. And the reason why I make that distinction is because they're not a project manager. They're not building the roadmap. What they're doing is suggesting roadmap changes, usually from a technology support standpoint, right? Like you want to be able to expand your database to be able to do real-time delivery, and we have this many number of databases that we're running that are all these different technologies. In order to achieve what you're trying to do, we have to build this capability into our software landscape. So that would be a recommendation that a very high-level strategic architect would make. They wouldn't figure out when is that going to happen, but they might say, in order to achieve X, you have to do Y first. And then the project managers and the product owners would get together and figure out what makes the most sense for a cost-benefit analysis, right? The architects aren't making those decisions. They're providing context for others to make those decisions. So that's why I push back against requirements, because I don't think they're building requirements. They're translating business requirements into capabilities.
But capabilities requires, to a certain degree, suggests that they are saying, well, you want this, and this is exactly how we can do the thing.
Yep.
I don't think enterprise architects in particular are not doing that from what I've seen. They're actually saying, the business says, I want real time, for example. I want real time data streaming.
Yep.
And the architect goes, oh, well, we have Kafka as a standard. Well, how do you know the current configuration of Kafka and everything else will fit our use case? And they're like, well, we know from an industry perspective that Kafka is used for this.
Right.
We have it on our checkbox, right?
Yep.
So we don't have to go through compliance or evaluation.
Right.
And then what happens is that somewhere down the chain, a builder of some type which could be a solutions architect,
Could be.
could be a systems architect or a software architect, is actually going to build the capability.
Concept. Yeah.
And so my argument, though, I think somewhere, Louis, I think does align with your definition because I think it is better. I think, and I don't think enterprise architects necessarily have this, although it would be nice, right? I think the solutions architects and the software and system architects should be required to figure out whether or not that requirement can be met with a capability before anybody says this is what we're going to do.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about building a proof of concept, right?
Basically.
Yeah. Which I think good architecture teams that I've worked with in the past have done some of that before they put something on the roadmap, before they decide that something's going to happen, before they decide, especially to bring in a new technology. They're building a proof of concept to make sure that it aligns and plays nice with every other technological system that is in play. Because I think that's the other thing we're not talking about here is we're talking about building new things without testing to see if it works with everything else. I think that an architect also knows where all the bodies are buried and knows where the fault lines exist. And so if somebody tries to build things on a broken system, some level of the architecture stack should say, hey, guys, we have a weakness over here and it needs to be shored up.
Go ahead and say what you were going to say, Chris, about integrations.
So a good architect probably knows where the bodies are buried.
Yeah.
My experience has been that the architects very often come in as an architect and they have their idea of what solutions are going to solve the business problems. And that's what you do, or that's what they want you to do. And they don't know where the bodies are buried. Usually it's the builders that know where the bodies are buried. And unfortunately, a lot of the times, those two people don't talk, or they don't get along, or
I do this to Louis.
We just hit on the same thing we keep talking about.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like that these people need to work together.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, because Louis, I feel like I would know your mind about this, where it's like, well, an architect and a builder relationship, even if that builder role is stacked on a solutions architect or any of the tactical architects we just talked about, those builders and evaluators would be feeding back to the enterprise architect saying, by the way, there's a body buried here, there's a body buried here. And because I think we're talking about, Louis, correct me if this is wrong, is that you were mentioning integration points. And I think there's two general types of integration points when we decide we're going to launch an application or a product. Is that there's integration points that are like product to product. Like I have a capability in one application that needs to derive a capability from another application. That's one, I think, type of integration point. The other is the operational, the security, the business kind of ones that are like, do we have monitoring?
Right.
Do we have logging? Does this app actually integrate with our existing stack that addresses all of our business security and business technical and business operations concerns? And so to your point, though, Louis, I think is that I feel like we keep coming back to the same answers to almost everything, is that communication is like the thing for everything. And whether it's written or in person, or just that there's a steady flow of recent, up-to-date, accurate, improved communication. Because then you've got your speculators, the ones who are saying, hey, I think we can do this with these requirements, communicating with your builders, right? The ones who are doing both the proof of concept and later on the implementation.
Yeah.
But you said something like that wasn't your experience.
No, because honestly, my experience is that most architects are also human. And so they're also engineers. And so they have their opinions on what the right thing to do is. And that's what they want to do. And it doesn't matter whether it actually will work for the solution or not. They think that that's the right way to do it.
So if we talk about software architecture, like we talk about architects that build buildings, okay, the customer, the business, has needs, and they go to architecture to say, how do we meet these needs, right? Architecture plans out at a high level by creating an architectural design, maintaining that design on what the needs should look like from, a building perspective. They don't know where they're going to put furniture, which are features. They don't know where they're going to put all these other things. They just know about the structure of the thing. And then they partner with general contractors and other contractors who do the work, who sometimes run into problems. And then there's a feedback loop between architecture, who understands the coding and understands the business needs and understands all these things. And there should be communication and a way to solve these problems, because maybe the contractors are running into a problem that can't be done according to the plans. The plans need to be modified. Things need to be built, and you can't delay things that need to be delivered to the customer. Right. So the general contractor, in my opinion, they are people who are running Agile teams, running development teams, running those teams, right? That's because they're providing the actual labor to do the building, not the architects. And ultimately, that's how this should be working. Now, with a software application, it's often much bigger and can't be done in the same way that a building can be done.
Right.
Because many pieces can be built simultaneously in software, and you can't always do that with a construction project.
Also, I would say that in software, like with a building, you have an idea of everything that needs to be done to make that building finished. Software doesn't have that.
Yeah.
Software, you have an idea and you start, and the actual end product may end up being different than what you thought of because of, learning that this feature isn't actually important, or,
Emergent design.
Yeah,
too.
Right. But interestingly, like I thought of something when you were talking about the buildings. If a builder was like, oh, I need to build a house, and they start building a house, but don't ever learn that the owner of that house is actually in a wheelchair and needs wider hallways and wider doors and all that, like you're going to end up with the same type of situation you have in software.
Yeah. Yep. The other part is that builders, even general contractors, don't always know the codes or requirements for buildings of different sizes or shapes.
That's true.
And so they may build a building which is fundamentally unsafe because they didn't work with an architect who's done a whole bunch of math to make sure that the building is built in a safe manner, especially if it's a weird shape, right? So they need each other to be successful. And if they don't talk to each other and they're not engaged with each other and they're not solving problems together, that's a problem.
Right.
And so I think, what we talked about at the beginning was different levels of architecture.
Right.
And I think that is how software scales the multifaceted implementation of writing software, unlike the way you do with buildings. You can't have, with a building, you have an architectural design and it can speak to everyone, and it's much more waterfall than we do in software, because we want to develop many features, many capabilities at once. And so instead, what you have to have is a grand architect who knows how the whole design is supposed to operate from a very strategic level.
Right.
And then at every level of granularity, you then have someone who's connected to architecture, who understands their part of the plan, who is part of the feedback loop to the great architect, if you want to call him a chief architect, or you want
How
to
does
call
that work with the building, by the way, that feedback loop?
I mean, general contractors talk to architects all the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I know several architects who sometimes have to go onto job sites to work with the general contractors to try and figure out how to solve a problem because something didn't work the way everyone expected it to.
Right.
So that there should be no restriction in building software from people saying, hey, we have a problem, pulling the line, as they call it, to stop work for a specific team and bring people in to help try and solve it, right? Because that's honestly the role of leadership, is to set a direction and then support the teams in the execution.
Yep.
And that, I think, when Chris talks about architects coming in who are not builders of the software, the building is already, or the software is already in progress or has been in progress for many years. They don't know where the bodies are buried, nor should we expect them to.
Right.
But they should be able to look at the architectural design and say, oh, you might have incompatibility problems here and here and here.
Or this code has changed.
Or this code has changed.
We've
Learned something that changed things, and be able to implement expertise in that way. But they're there to support the teams and not override the teams and make the teams do it their way.
Well, hold on. This is a very seditious idea. So I just want to, we're going to pause the thing around the business supporting the whole thing, because we're going to come back to that.
Okay.
I want to throw out this very seditious idea that both of you suggested somewhere, right? You basically suggested that design decisions are being made, not just in the architecture role, but any of the builder roles that are cooperating in this vision of building this particular product or whatever it is. Are you saying design decisions are happening at every level?
Is this waterfall, or is this some sort of agile methodology?
But let's say it's even an iteration of
Sure.
right.
Well,
sprint.
Iterative implies that they're following some agile methodology.
Oh, okay. So then what's the distinction?
A distinction is that with waterfall, all the design happens before any code is written.
Right.
And so all the design is being done by people who will not write the code. Those people may contribute to the idea, but they're not designing anything.
The whole list is defined.
So you're coming with a 300-page document of everything that needs to be done, and then the teams break it apart and deliver the pieces to deliver the thing, and no one gives really any feedback until the end, right? That's how a traditional waterfall project
And
operates.
that works well for fixed products that exist physically in time that have the fixed iteration for the most part.
There's a whole
It works
big
well
other
for
stuff.
buildings.
But like
Yeah.
even stadiums, like if we look at stadiums, how many times have stadiums been torn down in Atlanta
Yep.
that didn't fit the need,
Yep.
and we needed a new one, and so we needed to do that. Whereas software, at least in the digital world, can just be evolved.
Well, the great thing about software, and this is the reason why, and again, this is part of the reason why Agile Manifesto and the whole Agile community was built, was because people realized that the software, you can start to deliver value much earlier in the process. You
Right.
don't have to have a product that's 100% complete in order before anyone can start to realize value from it. And that's awesome. It's like building a stadium where you build the field and you don't build any of the seats.
Right.
And guess what? You can get some value out of it because your teams can practice on the field.
Right.
So you're getting some realized value out of it before everything is 100% complete.
Yeah.
Right. That's the idea, supposedly the idea about around every software, and the reason why we're trending in this direction. But in an Agile project, right, the current philosophy, the idea is that design, the real design, happens a little at every level, but mostly on the team that's writing the software.
The feature or the
That's when we talk
right.
about emergent design. We're
Right.
talking about teams that are writing code and saying, you know what, I can do better because I know what value the customer needs and I understand who my customer is. I can say, the business has asked for this feature, but if I write 3 more lines of code, I can make that feature 10 times better.
Right.
And they design it that way. They probably talk to people, architecture, the project manager, the product owner,
Hopefully.
the business, in order to get buy-in.
They don't always.
Because this is a team effort. That's the way it should be. It's a team effort. So that emergent design, allowing engineers to improve upon things and receive feedback on the ways that they want to improve it. Because this is how a team thinks should actually operate. A team member has an idea,
Right.
change, even an architectural piece of the software. It starts a conversation. That conversation goes to architecture. It goes to the people who are designing the UX. It goes to the business, and it allows for the business to capture an idea that they didn't have before.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But everyone has a role to play, and architecture absolutely has a role to play, because if no one is keeping track of the greater design
Changes.
and more, and I would advocate that the other thing that they are technically responsible for that most companies don't do, they're responsible for the register that keeps track of all of the technical debt.
Right, because there could
Right.
be risk associated with some of these changes that you're saying yes or no or delay. Like we're gonna and just keeping track of that.
No, generally no one is. That's the problem.
No one ends up with a fix like we've got a stadium. Software is always evolving, especially in the context of the frameworks and the evolving needs of a customer. So you're right. So like someone came the other day to me and said, "Hey, we want to put tracing into our thing," which was an operational concern, right? Security concern, operational concern. And the business came back and said, "Well, we don't want to pay for tracing." I said, "That's fine. Let's just put that in the risk register. We'll note that we don't have tracing, so that the next time we need tracing, we will have noted that we haven't needed it, and we should reevaluate that decision."
Mhm.
So is that the kind of thing that you're talking about?
Yes.
Kind of feedback loop?
Yes, and there's more to it than that.
Okay.
So when you talk about the risk register, and most people talk about that with security, right?
Not just business impact.
Not just business impacts. That's why I called it a tech debt register. I'm using a security term, register, but really all it is a backlog of things that we know are problems and need to be fixed, or opportunities that we've decided not to jump on, like adding tracing,
Right.
and with a decision. So now, when it comes up 6 months from then, the architect can say, we had a discussion about tracing. This was the outcome. If we need to change it, that's great.
Right.
We already have a seed of a plan for how to implement this potentially, because architecture's job is to track these things.
Yeah.
But the other problem that I'm trying to note is that teams will sometimes not have enough time to finish something 100%.
Right.
And it gets accepted by the business that this feature is done, but they want to add more to it. but somehow that story disappears, or there's a limitation that they know about that they don't register as a bug because technically it's not a bug. It's really technical debt, right? Or they know that they're writing on a particular language, that compatibility with another system is going to go away. The support is going to go away after a couple of years. That's a piece of technical debt. So all of these things need to be owned by someone rather than owned by the team, because this is where a lot of these problems lie, is that they end up living with the team. In particular, they live with a person on a team. And that person gets called every time there's a problem because this one system only works on Windows NT and blah, 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 right?
Did you say Windows NT?
I did. But you know,
3.5 or 4.0?
I mean, probably 3.5. So you know that is a real issue. That slows down the productivity of the team. It becomes this tribal knowledge that when that person leaves, you lose it, and then suddenly when there's a problem, no one knows what the hell is going on
because there's no record, right?
So I would argue that architect's job is to keep track of the grand design of the whole application, right, and all of its intricate parts, all of its integration points, but also to constantly keep a register of all of the technical debt that has come out of the teams and all the business decisions that were decided to be stepped aside or evaded or not opted for with why that decision was made.
So let's back this up a little bit because I just want to clarify something. So you have I'm pointing at Chris for those who can't see me, right? I'm pointing at Chris, right? Is that, Chris, you have worked, I would argue, as a systems and software design architect, and you've worked at the solutions architect level. As far as I know, you haven't had to do the compliance and all that other stuff for the enterprise architecture.
No, not directly.
Right. Okay. And then, Louis, you have run massive teams around portfolio, strategy, the whole 9 yards, and have probably interacted at all levels, both strategic and tactically, with designers and architects.
Yep.
And so, and I've held the role briefly, less on the solutions and systems design roles, more on the solutions architecture roles, and a lot on the enterprise architect roles. But I haven't, other than that particular enterprise architecture space, I haven't had to run multiple segments of enterprise architects. So I just want to make sure that we're clear in the audience. Like, this is why we've kind of ended up in the spaces that we are, is that you're more on the builder side of the doing things side. I'm more in the middle side, and you're more on the like, well, we're going to do stuff, but I'm going to look at it holistically, right?
And honestly, if it worked like Louis said, I probably would be like, yeah, we need architects. That sounds great. Unfortunately, I've not seen it work that way.
So here's a side note. I've talked about on this show. I've talked about SAFe a couple of times.
Yes.
One of
you have?
Yeah.
Okay.
One of, and I want to say for the record that I'm not a SAFe advocate. I don't think it's the answer to all problems.
It's not?
No. But I think that every model has valuable things to pull out of it, and they, at least around 4.0, I know it's on like 6.0 now for the version of SAFe. But at 4.0, they did a lot to integrate architecture into the way that they built their model. And it's a little like we talked about, different layers of architecture all engaging.
Right.
But the place I saw that implemented it the best, way they did it is that, you know, they had Agile teams. They were operating both Scrum and Kanban. They had a centralized chief enterprise architect. They had solutions architect for individual pieces of the application.
Right.
So specific things that would integrate with other things. They had an architect that was over that thing. There was that architecture team was the central person who tried to keep track of everything. And then the individual architects that were working with that guy, that was their whole job. That's all that they did. But on every single Agile team, there was someone that the team had elected to be their architectural representative.
Right. Yeah.
And so they would have meetings, the architecture team would have meetings, and all of the people from all of the individual teams would attend those meetings as if they were a member. They would contribute to the design. They would contribute to the technical debt register. They would contribute to all these things.
Yeah.
And they would bring the experience from the team to the architects, and they would collaborate to create decisions. But the chief enterprise architect, their role was to support the teams, but also to provide guardrails for everyone in the organization. Because someone on the team would say, I want to use Mongo. And they would say, no, we're not set up to do that. We can't bring one team in to use a single outlier database. We need to have some further adoption or reason to do that. So instead of having this sprawl of emergent design that's coming from the teams where they don't know what's going on, similar to those general contractors that we talked about that don't know what they don't know, that person's job was to keep everyone aligned. And the feedback loop was amazing.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with SAFe, there was I attended for this company, I attended one of their program increments, their PI planning sessions. And they had this massive conference room with all of the teams with their own planning screen, where they were all planning their own sprints, right? And the architecture member of the team would sometimes leave the group and go over to this centralized architecture space where all the architecture team were hanging out. And they would pull individual architects to their team space to have a conversation. And if they needed to bring in the chief architect, they would. And the chief architect's job was to keep track of all of the changes that were happening, all the suggested changes across the entire PI. And the great part was when they got to the end of the PI planning session, when they went through what they were planning to do, the architect could answer anyone who was like, I have concerns about how we're going to implement this in the application. He said, here's our plan. This is how we're going to solve your specific issue. Or we recognize that this is also a risk. And that helped them make even more valid decisions about what they needed to do. So anecdotal, but it was great to see that interaction and that feedback. And I think that's what Chris is noting, at least from his experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I will mention is that Louis you and I worked on a project for an unnamed company. And one of the things that we were centering around was this concept of architectural decision records, right? Which basically just captured every decision. And I remember one of the big conversations that we were having with them was they were like, well, we note decisions like we're going to use this technology or we're going to go in this direction. And I remember you standing there in front of the CTO going, well, I mean, that's great. Like, that's exactly what you want to do. And at the same time, remember, there's all these other decisions being made and they need to also be captured and surfaced. And God, I almost said his name. I didn't want to do that. And I remember them going, well, what do we care about those decisions at that level? And I remember it was like, those are arguably the most important decisions being made because they're happening at the builder level.
Yep.
That's where the rubber hits the road, right?
Yep.
But I will tell you, Louis, and I want to throw this question out there. I have been in that situation so many times where people don't understand the impact of saying yes to one more piece of technology. Like, you just brought up a great concept of like architecture's job is not only to track all the design, enable the translation, and do all that, but also like there has to be guardrails. We can't use every single. How many NoSQL databases did I see were listed the other day? 120 as of 2025. 120 production level, not concept, production level databases that you could run. Everything from React to OrientDB, all this stuff, right? Ranging from, I mean, it was just across the spectrum. So I guess you raised an interesting point, which is that there is this aspect of like, well, we want to do everything that makes sense for the business. And one of the things that works is to keep tech sprawl down.
Yeah.
But literally the other day, I had someone come to me and they said, we're a Linux shop. I don't understand why we can't just throw a Windows box in production. And I had, like, my brain literally melted for a second where it was like, well, I could talk about all of the builder decisions, like the systems decisions. I can talk about all the solutions integration decisions that have to be made. And then let's talk about licensing. Let's talk about auditing. Let's talk about governance. Let's talk about, like, there were, and we've talked about the 25 virtual production before, and I'm like, that alone just attends to the kind of this whole thing. It doesn't even attend to the whole landscape of what happens out there. So, like, what would be your response to someone who said, Michael, I don't understand. We have 1,000 Linux boxes. Why can't we put a Windows box out there without you telling me it's going to take a minimum of 3 to 6 weeks because we need to figure out all of these other concerns? What do you say to that?
Who's going to support it?
That's the
like
first questions.
Where are the skills to be able to manage that server? Like,
but Chris, everyone understands Windows.
Yeah, Windows. My mom uses Windows. That, by the way, that was kind of the response.
Yeah, I know. It's
right?
always the response.
And so then when I said, hey, what about logging? Like, what about we don't have a monitoring system can probably support that, but we've never done it before.
Yeah.
Logging, by the way, operates very differently. It's not text files, and it's embedded inside of a system. There needs to be some exploitation. Again, all solvable problems, but like that's why it's going to take us 3 to 6 weeks for us to even get to the field, much less the Coliseum of your Windows ask, right? And then I said, and then there's a whole ecosystem for Windows. And maybe I picked on the wrong thing, but if like I switched to SAP, we'd be in the same boat, right? There's a whole ecosystem of tools that go with these things. And I said, our DevOps people already have 14 tools that they're having to deal with on a daily basis. Yeah. Now we've got a whole other type of DevOps person. They're like, no, DevOps is DevOps. Like, and I said, well, first of all, let's back that up and say systems administration or systems engineers for a second. Linux systems engineers are very different actually from Windows systems engineers. And I said, there's a whole different set of tools. And he goes, and he said, what tools are we talking about? And I said, well, I need systems management, I need monitoring agents, I need provisioning agents, I need configuration, I need security and compliance enforcement. I went through the whole thing. And he goes, well, how come we can't just use Terraform for Windows? He knew enough at the C level to say something like that. And I said, it's interesting because, and it felt like I had to back up and be like, do you think I'm lying when I tell you it's 3 to 6 weeks? Because I've given you a bunch of evidence, and now you're basically saying, well, I don't understand. I don't believe that evidence, right? Yeah. And, in somewhere, there's no enterprise architect in the space, right? I'm acting as one, right? But that's not my actual role. And so, like, what do you say to that kind of, like, in a sense, undervaluing of all the necessary checkbox to take a technology and design it properly and stick it into an environment? Chris, you want to take that one first?
What do you say? You say, I'm out.
Just pull the shoes.
I mean, sort of, but like at the point where they don't trust you, what are you there for?
So then it's a different conversation.
Right. Yeah. Like that is the problem, is that at that point it becomes, why am I even here? If you're going to ignore everything I say.
Well, remember, I'm not an enterprise architect. I'm just pretending I'm playing one.
Right. But if there isn't one, then you are. Like, that's the thing.
So your answer is like, well, hold on. Now we have a trust problem that's even different from
absolutely.
Problem.
Absolutely.
Right? True.
And unfortunately, a lot of times, well, I don't know about a lot of times. I have seen more times than I would like to, a C-suite person, I'm not going to say it was the whole C-suite, but a C-suite person that has a particular idea in their head and they will not listen to reason at all.
You mean like conference designing by conference?
Yeah.
Like where they go and they come back and they're like, I just saw a great new idea. We should go ahead and do the whole thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Which can be, I think, the seed for experimentation and exploration.
Absolutely. But
it's not poised that way sometimes.
No, it's we're doing this now.
Do it now.
Yeah.
AI is going to solve all of our problems.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I just snuck in an AI reference.
God damn it.
Check. We got it. Louis, what do you say to that question? Like, what do you think?
I think that no matter what the level is, that when somebody has these ideas that they're having trouble letting go of, it's often they're excited about that thing, and potentially that they're bored or they're frustrated or they see limitation in the way that we're currently doing things. So the best thing to do is for you to try and understand the root of why they're pushing for this. But if that's not an option, if you're trying to build to explain this to this person about how this is different, I think going into the numbers and talking about the compatibility issues and the technical limitations, that's not going to work. You need to have an example that is a little bit more poignant and understandable by anybody. And so I would say, okay, let's imagine that our environment is like Earth. We have a bunch of things happening on Earth that are all compatible with each other. They all breathe the same kind of air.
Yes.
They all have access to water.
Right.
It's a wonderful ecosystem.
Right. Okay.
You're trying to move us to Mars. And none of our systems are prepared for an arid planet that is frozen. Right? So we would need to build all the support systems for us to live there. And we'd also have to pay for the travel that takes us from Earth to Mars.
Right.
So is there enough benefit to make that a possibility?
Yes.
Or is it just that you need a Windows box so that you can portal through it to get to Steam?
Maybe.
Right?
Okay. Yes, maybe.
I don't know. So you have to understand the why, first of all, but then trying to explain it in a simple way of saying, look, things are stable right now. What you're asking for is a expensive, arduous journey that potentially has a lot of risk. You may think it's a simple ask, but it's not simple.
Yeah.
And so trying to convey that message is, I think, what's important. But this can be even that engineer is asking to use Mongo or wanting to use
Right.
React instead.
Right.
In my experience, most of the time that comes out of boredom, frustration, or what they feel like is an opportunity that's passing them by and they want to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
And by being able to talk about that, you can find better ways to use our skills to create emergent design to improve the environment or the application in a way that doesn't have the risks or costs associated with trying to live on both Mars and Earth at the same time.
Oh, yeah. Well, here's an interesting part to both of your points. This is where that whole conversation landed. One, I brought up the fact that it doesn't seem like any facts or numbers that I bring up are actually going to speak to you. So I said, let me switch gears here. And then I switched to your conversation. And I realized I was talking to a business person who was asking for an engineering solution, which, by the way, if you're watching this and you're a business person, please bring me problems, not answers.
Yeah.
Right? I will help you any which way I can. But don't come to an engineer with an engineering solution if you are not an engineer. Just like I won't come to you with a business solution if you're a business person, because I'm not a business person, right? Somebody suggested. But it says a thought. It's like I went up there and I said, why do you want this? And the person said, I'm looking for a new product line for us to expand into. And I was like, oh, that's a different conversation. Okay, cool. Like, okay, so tell me what you're thinking. And they're like, well, I think we should get into the Windows ecosystem. And there was this whole conversation about the value of this from a business perspective and where this would land and all this other stuff. And I said, okay, so you realize then it's not actually just a Windows box.
Yeah.
You're asking to open up a whole new product line for our business, which, to your point in metaphor, is the journey.
Yeah.
We're now opening up a whole new planet for us to basically have customers go to. And we got to figure out the journey and the whole 9 yards and how we're going to live and breathe and all this other 9 yards. And I said, so interestingly enough, framed it not as it was big as an engineering problem, but it was big from their ask, their why, as a business problem.
Yeah.
And so then when that was understood, it was like, okay, well, what if we did another line of business instead? And I won't tell you what they landed on, but it was something much smaller that was actually adjacent. It was like the moon.
Yeah.
Not Mars. And I was like, oh, the moon. Well, that's only like, 30 million miles away or whatever. I was like, we can get to that. No problem. And I was like, that's easier to do, right? Because it's within space and we got easier support and it's adjacent and da-da-da-da. And the next thing you know, we landed up on a new product line that was far more doable, more acceptable from a cost, security, reliability, risk, all the other pieces, and much more consumable, but only because I had to take the enterprise architect's perspective, which is, what are you trying to do? Why are we doing this? Which I would argue that why at every level is actually super valuable, but I did not ask the right question right off the bat. That ideally would have been the first thing. Why do you want this? Because I'll give it to you. I just want to know what we're trying to do with it.
So what you're saying is that by communicating with the person, you actually got to a solution.
Yes.
Just
By
pointing that out.
I just want to say this, though, and I want to be careful with this word. By asking the interested question,
Right.
Which is not, oh, God, well, there's no fucking way we can do that, right? The interested question was, hey, tell me more.
Right.
Tell me more, because I assumed I understood after the first question why they were asking. And that was a mistake on my part. I ideally would have stopped at the very first question and said, okay, tell me everything that you're thinking of this. Just give it all to me. Right?
Yeah. And I mean, I would say that everybody should kind of try to default to that. Like, I had an entire team that I was trying to teach to say no, but let's figure out how to say yes. Like, what is it you're trying to accomplish? How do we get to what you want? Like,
fuck you, Chris. We don't have time to listen. That's what Gen AI is for.
right. Yeah.
That's a whole thing in and of itself.
Yeah.
That's 2 AI references.
Well,
we're gonna start a jar where you have to put $5 in every time.
Okay. Okay.
So I think, and this brings us back to the architecture,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
That context matters.
Mm.
And if people come with problems, if people come with problems with no context for the reason the problem exists or how they think they want to solve it, they don't give people context. People will derive their own context based on their experience with the person and the environment, right? which is how we end up with IT cultures that are just a culture of saying no.
No. Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So anybody, doesn't matter what level you are,
Right.
the more you can derive context in solving problems and delivering value, the better you will be received and the more successful everyone will be. And in my mind, the reason why you need architects is to have a constant eye on the current shared context of everything you're doing. Because they're the guardians of the software context, the technical context. This is where we are.
Right.
These are the things we plan to change to make it to the next step.
Right.
Those are all context. And they're different contexts at different levels.
Yeah.
So when the C levels are getting together, you have the chief product officer, you have the CEO, you have your chief engineer or chief architect, all sitting in a room. They have the desire to move the business forward.
Right.
The people who can plan the roadmap to make the business better.
Right.
And the person who provides current context and provides potential solutions for the way this new context could be added, all sitting within the room. And so by creating that at every single level with your product owner, with your architects, with your teams, you're gonna have the same experience at a different granular level of success.
Yes.
But you have to have the context every time.
Yeah.
Well, Louis, this inherently, by the way, by you talking about, hey, they are the kind of, in a sense, heralds, arbiters, managers, holders, whatever, keepers of the technical context. You realize that automatically I'm sitting there thinking, oh yeah, that's what the product. I mean, that's why you usually have a product owner who is the customer and business advocate paired with the technical.
Mm-hmm.
Like at every level, that fractal of having the technical and I've seen that work so many times. And so you realize then we're sitting right on the answer to our initial question from the beginning of this podcast is, do we need architects?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the answer is that not only are there maybe more architects than we realize, because if emergent design is a thing, that means there's designers at every level of the business. And the context of asking more questions to the gentleman who was asking me about the Windows box turned that problem for me into an opportunity for everybody. And if I hadn't done that, and so context now, as we stated, becomes important at that emergent design level, at every level, from the person who's doing the systems and the software, the solutions piece, and the enterprise architecture. So it sounds like, and please disagree, it sounds like we are saying that architects are important. They do already exist. And that if you really want to make them function, context and communication seems to be the key.
Yeah.
And I would say, in my experience, the architects that have not been very good don't have the full context. They only have the picture of where you want to go. They don't have the context of where we are. And that's the problem.
We got to talk about this problem that keeps popping up around how communication seems to be the answer to every problem that we've talked about thus far. Seems like we're addicted to communication. Seems like a thing.
Yeah.
And it kind of has me wondering. So maybe there's another podcast there.
So as far as this is concerned, I think that the market should change in one very specific way.
Well, let's hear it.
I think that I know a lot of engineers who consider the movement from I'm a developer to I'm a team lead to I'm an architect as their career path.
Right.
Right. And I think that is the wrong way of looking at things. And what I think they're chasing is career development for their salary, for their title, and so on.
Yes.
So this has become an HR problem. This has become a company organization problem because of titles and the way that exists. Because I think many architects I've met are just more senior developers. They just want to write code. They want to participate in the architecture discussion, but they don't want to actually be architects.
Right.
And so what I think we need to do is figure out how to create real architecture people and teams and create healthy communications between developers and architecture and allow for a culture where developers who want to write code but want to participate in the architecture conversation have the opportunity to do so. And engineers who want to be architects but don't particularly want to spend all their time coding can spend time thinking about compatibility, thinking about the overall scheme of how things are designed, can communicate with other technical people about risk. Those things can become what they do, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that by changing the way we think about these roles and these salary levels and bands and blah, 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 we can really change how everyone's contributing to the value of the organization. We'll have much better outcomes.
Agreed.
Yeah. And I would agree it's an HR problem. I would also say that it's a management or people development problem.
That's a whole...
Because, well, I know. Because, I mean, that is like the whole, engineer to lead engineer, dev, whatever, to architect. Like, that's a fine career path, but each of those roles has different skills and different focus.
Yeah.
And like drastically different in some cases.
And they should.
Yeah. And I don't think everybody realizes that.
No.
And I think like even people that should, like HR people or managers, they don't realize that.
Well, the HR people don't understand, and they should.
No, I know they don't.
Honestly, I don't think that they should. I think that organization or org design does not sit inside of HR. Organization design sits within the leadership level of each organization. The HR people are there to help do a bunch of administrative stuff for the business, to help keep there's
overstepping of roles there that we've seen many times.
I think recruiting, in-house recruiting is almost always HR.
Well, it should start with HR, right? To do the screening to make sure they're a real person.
Yeah.
But once it comes down to answering questions that the HR people don't know, we can't expect the HR people to know everything.
And this is more of a, like, let's say it's a positional problem.
Yeah.
We have created a high degree of certain perceptions of positions that require elevation in order to advance your career, right? But what's interesting, and I feel like we could do a whole podcast just on this, craftsmanship, honing your skills, deepening your perspective. There's a way for you to be a coder. Like, I met senior staff developers at Amazon, AWS, who ran some of the most awesome services in the entire world, and they were developers. They participated in architectural decisions, but they weren't architects.
Yeah.
They were merely leads on a team that created S3 or RDS or whatever the service was that they were working on at the time. And they were recognized for the value, advancement, seniority, and context they had, and they weren't architects. But man, they were right there with the architects creating adjacency.
Well, that's what I'm saying is
that's
let
exactly
people participate that want to, that have the skill, that want to engage in the conversation. Why limit them?
Yeah.
Right? But to answer the question, are architects needed? Yes.
100%. Yeah, at every level. I agree. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for an amazing episode, gentlemen.
Yep.
We now have more material for the next ones.
Always do.